And a reminder that at any point you can interrupt me. Your questions are really what make the class come to life. Otherwise, it's just a dry, dusty online presentation. So I think those that are going to join us today are here. We'll start with invocation. Close your eyes, unless you're driving, and connect to the earth. So either through your feet or your pelvis or both. Then tilt your pelvis forward and back so that you find a sense of freedom and movement in your roots, so that they don't fall asleep. And a little bit side to side with the pelvis, just finding that your root is stable and has freedom. And slightly bow your head to your heart, allowing the crown of the head to open up to the cosmic Heavenly Father. That great expanse that is limitless and infinite is the Heavenly Father. Double breath with tension, twice in the nose, withdraw into the spiritual eye. Stay there. Remember to relax when you exhale twice. But keep your consciousness inward. Again. Last time. Short prayer. Heavenly Father, source of all energy, Divine Mother, she who receives the energy transforms it and nourishes me with it. Saints and sages throughout time, including Paramahansa Yogananda, Avatar Babaji. It is thou who does directly sustain this body. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change about it. The courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. May I embrace fully this incarnation, making peace with who I am, my unique expression in this incarnation, and flower fully toward thy infinite expression, connecting to my eternal, never-changing formless spirit. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So nice to see each of you. Today, Ayurveda subject is prakriti. The Sanskrit derivation is from the root sound krit, 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 which comes into words like karma and kriya. Here we have kriti, which means a form, something that's been made. And then pra is that which is native to me, that which shines forth from me, that which fills me out or fills me up. That's the prefix. And it is loosely translated as my baseline constitution. What kind of creature am I? Hopefully, as we go through the learning today, it'll help each of you become more comfortable and confident with who you are, what your incarnation is, and how to best garden yourself. as a review, we go through the Panchabhuta, the 5 elements. So you can repeat after me. Space,
Space,
air,
air,
fire,
fire,
water,
water,
earth.
earth.
Akash,
Akash,
Vayu,
Vayu,
Agni,
Agni,
Apa,
Ava,
Bu.
Bu.
Another word that we use for earth is Prithvi.
Prithvi.
We have a form of divine mother known as Pritha, which is why Krishna is called Partha, which comes from Pritha. So we are here, divine expressions. And Yogananda said so regularly that God is equally amongst all of us. It's just that in some, God is more clearly reflected. And that is a description of how we can polish our own being, regardless of what prakriti we have. Each of us can polish and become more a reflection of God's clarity. As we enter into this month where we celebrate Father's Day in the United States, I think a really great opportunity for us to reflect on our own relationship to the Heavenly Father, and even a concept of that as the world has suffered through many abuses of power by men, by male leaders. Earth itself is suffering from the lack of respect given to the sacred feminine. There's been a lot of push against men and father figures in general. Frequently when I teach in the United States, there is a reluctance to embrace the concept of a heavenly father. But that's what we're here celebrating this month, and I encourage each of you to use the summertime where the warmth of the nights allows us to be out and to feel that vast expanse of peace, the energy that's ever shining down upon us, the gravity that holds us in place and protects us, and have a sense that there is indeed a heavenly Father that is supporting you, keeping you safe, providing for you. Also provided you the seed to become the form that you are. And making peace with all of the limitations that each of our fathers, our human fathers, had to celebrate what they were able to do. Our next part of review is to review the organizations that the 5 elements come into and the qualities that those organizations take on. So besides Christopher or John, sorry, or Brian, or John, you're certainly welcome to join in. Who can tell me the qualities of space and air when they come together to make Vata dosha? Without reading. Mm-hmm.
Dry, light, clear,
Good. Keep going.
subtle,
Mobile,
Very good. And it's also cold.
hmm,
And the
Oh.
main job of space and air in a living organism is what?
To move, I think.
Yeah, movement.
Movement.
Responsible for movement. And so space and air and the qualities that they bring are then represented more obviously in creatures that have been touched by the space and air elements in their constitution. Now, all of us have space and air in our constitution. All of us have a need for vata dosha. It's just that some creatures have more space and air in their constitution. And who can tell us the qualities of fire and water, these seemingly opposites that dance together in organisms to some extent?
It would
limit
be
each other.
oily,
Mm-hmm.
hot, sparkly.
Good. Anybody else can join in, help Deb with these 7 major qualities.
Sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Oily, light, hot, spreading, sharp, maybe penetrating or something like that.
Yeah, that's good, Laura. You're getting there. Oily, hot, and sharp.
Oily, hot and sharp,
Fermenting, spreading liquid
fermenting, spreading liquid.
that sparkles. So that is light. It's both light in the sense of not heavy and also light as in luminous. Fire is responsible for light and the visible light. So an important distinction here, a couple of them. One is that Pitta dosha, fire and water, are liquid in nature, not solid.
Oh,
Pitta dosha is fire and water is sharp and penetrating. So its action in the body is that which is frequently catabolic, breaks things down. Oily, hot, sharp, fermenting, spreading liquid. Spreading is meaning that it's passively mobile. It's not mobile like space and air, which are very fast and mobile. It's not stable like earth and water are stable, but Pitta dosha, the fire water principle, is spreading. Then we have water and earth, and when water and earth come together in the
here,
body.
I've got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. What does fermenting mean? I mean, how do you apply that to the dosha?
Yeah, so the Sanskrit term is actually visram. Visram means fleshy smelling. Fleshy smelling is the Sanskrit guna, the quality that's listed in the classics. As I've made my own English sutras, I've used fermenting in that the quality of Pitta dosha is to be something that is processing. So it's processing. So fermentation is this process. So it's kind of bubbling, or the sense of how the agents of the microbes that work with different sugars or different grains that then create a fermentation process.
So that's all
There's
part
this-
of transformation.
Right. So the main job
That's
fire and water is transformation, and so fermenting is a word that I think helps people also understand the the psychological process where pitta dosha, as it comes into the psychology, certainly creates a sharp and penetrating quality. So there's this high degree of analysis in the pitta mind. But there's also this fermentation where it's difficult for pitta dosha to stop. So the fermentation is that like inability to let go and to be done. There's never good enough. It always just keeps going, going, going. So that's I think some of the semantics of why I chose that word. Certainly also fermented foods, and that principle of pitta that's involved in the fermentation process. While it's a healthy thing to have digestive aid, for people who are already tending towards a pitta gut dysfunction, which would show up as things like ulcers and loose stools, eating fermented foods can aggravate that. Even the use of so many condiments that have vinegar as a base shows the challenge of people that are too reliant on external digestive aid to their food, and it can become a problem. So fermenting is not the classic description. The classic description is visram, which means fleshy smelling, meaning that the body odor is quite noticeable in an organism. That's pitta. When pitta people sweat, there's a distinct odor. When kapha people sweat, kapha predominant creatures sweat, it's more like just water gets gushing off of them. Streams and streams of water. Vata predominant people don't sweat very much at all. Pitta people, there will be a strong odor that is fleshy smelling in nature. And then let us move on to the qualities of water and earth. So those of you that are learning can throw out some of the qualities, or guna is the Sanskrit word, water and earth.
it's oily,
Yes,
it's heavy,
yes,
it's cool,
yes.
it's gross, which I think means like large,
It means substantial. It means
substantial.
substantial and obvious, manifest. The opposite of gross is subtle.
Can you say that again, please?
The opposite of gross is subtle.
Subtle.
Subtle means I walk into a restaurant, and even though the decor is quite expensive, and even though the people are wearing very fancy outfits, something feels off. There's something in the air seems disturbing. That's subtle. Gross is I walk into a restaurant and people are clearly unclean. The carpet is full of mold and holes, and you know, the smell of burnt food is permeating the entire place. That's gross, as in substantial, obvious, manifest. So gross, heavy, cool. What other qualities? Oily.
So I don't quite understand dull, slow. That almost sounds insulting.
Yeah, the qualities of Kappadosha are um, ones that we have a lot of negative connotation in America, which is so celebratory of the thin physique, athletic physique, and also the sharp mind. Heavy, dull, and slow, thick, soft, stable, cool and smooth, sticky and cloudy, oily, clay-like. There are so many qualities to earth and water. The main job of earth and water is structure and lubrication. So there are two main jobs. Earth and water are responsible for our structure, clay, right? Earth and water is clay, and also the lubrication. So without lubrication, there cannot be movement. But with too much lubrication, movement is unstable. Dull and slow is the principle that earth and water gives. You can think of the mucous membrane lining of your entire GI tract as dull and slow. Without mucous membranes, if we took in any food, it would immediately ulcerate our GI tract. The same with our respiratory tract. So mucus itself is the sort of generic translation of Kappadosha. The Greek humors, as they called it, were wind, bile, and phlegm, wind, bile, and mucus. But I find these to be not supportive of a deeper understanding. So earth and water, the dull and slow, is the opposite of sharp and penetrating. So the insulating and retarding or slowing principle of earth and water is very necessary in the body for all of the buffering of all of the chemical actions. Heavy, dull, slow, thick, soft, stable, cool, smooth, sticky, cloudy, oily, clay-like. When we do these, it's interesting to see the reactions of people. Who wants to be called heavy, dull, slow, thick, soft, stable? But when we start to get to cool and smooth, that starts to sound better, right? But it also is a reflection on and I hate to overgeneralize it, but it's a reflection on white America. Certainly in other cultures, even in America, other racial predominance, there's more a celebration, larger form.
Yeah.
To be thick, to be stable. So.
But Pierre, don't we tend to like the people that have kapha? Like they tend to be, I don't know, like you said, steady, stable, like you want them to hug you, they're like
It's really, really important to have a diverse ecosystem. It's really, really important to be surrounded by all creatures. One of the things I love about my spiritual path is the universality of representation. One of the things that I love about yoga, Tai Chi, all breath initiated forms, the accessibility to all ages and all body types. So, but it is essential as a leader to recognize the qualities of different individuals. Though we all express God, it is wonderful to have a person with a kapha predominant form to be the one who is the greeter or secretary or the one who is there managing the business, because there's the insulating properties. They're not as bothered by all of the particulars or the mass public walking in. They're able to be buffered from all of that. So the qualities are the qualities. My wife and I were remarking upon our friend who's allowing us to use her home, who is a very highly kapha predominant woman. she is not just kapha predominant, but kapha super predominant. She would be like a hippopotamus or some huge form. She is incredibly broad skull. Her shoulders are super broad. Her hips are super broad. She can backpack for days and days and days. And how it manifests psychologically is that she has friends from all over. And they're people that my wife could not stand unless they were at this woman's home. Because my wife is a Vata Pitta dual doshic person, incredibly sensitive and incredibly sharp, and has very little patience or resiliency for something that is not what she prefers. So it's the nature of Kappadosha to be able to bring us all together. It's the nature of Kappadosha within our bodies to keep us together.
So Pierre, could you look, just out of curiosity, like my husband, I'm pretty sure he's kapha, whatever. Am I saying it correctly? Kapha dosha?
Yeah,
I
so
think, can you, like Mike wasn't, he's not like huge, but could you just look at him and tell he's kapha?
yeah, so that's pretty obvious with some, with a lot of creatures and with a lot of humans. So these apply not just to humans, but all living creatures, right? So it's pretty obvious when you see a hippopotamus that it's a kapha predominant creature, right? But it's a little bit trickier to see a raccoon and actually recognize that it is probably also kapha predominant member of the bear family because it's a smaller creature. But if you look at it, it actually has quite a broad jaw. It has, a very well insulated body. So it's a little trickier with some creatures, Then when Vata and Kapha come together, it is more difficult. Teresa has that as her baseline constitution. We look at Teresa, who's in your teacher training, and she neither seems super large nor seems super thin. So she's somewhere in the middle. So then oftentimes people get classified as Pitta predominant, but they're not. She doesn't have the sharp and penetrating attributes to her physique nor her personality. Am I making sense?
Yes.
She doesn't have the oily quality. She doesn't have hot. She doesn't even have like the sort of spreading quality. Pitta people, the spreading, you can think of it sort of as like red blood or acid or lava. But when it comes into personality, there's a great desire to actually spread oneself, one's teachings, one's opinions. So Pitta people are natural leaders, but anyway, so it is obvious oftentimes, and then many times it's not. And a reminder as we do this prakriti class that in some forms the elements are fairly evenly balanced. And in some forms, the elements are fairly evenly balanced, though none of them are really that high. In some forms, though, the elements are seemingly fairly evenly balanced, and they are all strong. So there are some creatures that come into this earth kind of like superheroes or they have, a preponderance of the space air principle, fire water principle, and water earth. We see that amongst the super athletes in the world. Had a teacher that started her own branch of the school down in Bargersville named Blythe Potter, who was also in the army, served in the Middle East for many years. Who's tridoshic with great strength of every attribute, every quality, 5 elements. And the challenge those people face is that they can just do just about anything. So they do just about everything. But anyway, as we turn to prakriti and we've reviewed these qualities, we now look at the physical form and how they show up. So both the physical and psychological form, we look at the qualities and we compare them. And we compare the things that do not change because kriti, the form, changes. Change is the only constant. In a life, change is the only constant. In a truly stable system, expects and prepares for change. A truly stable system also has an understanding of what kind of structure or system it has. So as we look at things that don't change in a creature, we don't look at body weight per se, but we do look at the skeletal structure. We look at the width of the bones. We look at the thickness of the skin. We look at the how the qualities have manifested into the reproductive organs and reproductive systems of that creature. We look at all of the physical attributes, the hair, the eyes, lips, nose, ears, the body hair. And all of this, of course, is different according to age. But if we were to look at, let's say, the skull shape for a Vata predominant creature will be thinner, perhaps drawn long or narrow. And we need to contrast that with people who may have had forceps used on their head during vaginal delivery, which was common for many decades when there were so many male OBGYNs that were impatient and said, let's just pull that thing out of there. I'm overgeneralizing, so please excuse me. There are times when it is life-saving to use forceps. But in sort of Vata dosha space and air, when we look at the organization, it will be more loosely organized. It doesn't organize that easily. So we see a skull that is small or thin and narrow in shape. We see a nose structure that is, crooked or thin or bent. The actual holes of the nose are small. The eyes are narrow set. The ears can either be quite small or abnormally long. The shoulders tend to be narrow. The bones themselves tend to be long and thin, or very long, or very abnormally short. So there's a wide variety, but there's not this kind of uniformness or well-organized sense of the body skeleton. The skin itself will be very thin. Like if you take your fingers and pinch your skin and rub it back and forth, Vata predominant creatures will have like a paper thin skin. The eyes will be darting. So they will have movement and they will be smaller eyes. The lips will be thin and tend to be dry, regardless of the climate. There will be hair on the creature. Usually there will be like kinky or curly hair that is drier in nature. And there will be some body hair. That it will be coarse or thin. So these are attributes that are common in the Vata predominant space and air are dominant in this creature. And we need to differentiate it from Vikriti. Vikriti is vit is a prefix that means away from or particular form. We each are in a state of Vikriti, meaning that we are somewhat away from our Prakriti. And Vikriti is what we treat when we're gardening. So as we change our diet and lifestyle, we're actually working with our Vikriti. But we need to remember our Prakriti. We need to remember what is our baseline constitution. I'm always looking to find balance by looking at how am I out of balance. And out of balance is Vikriti. So I am a very highly pitta predominant individual. Oily, hot, sharp, fermenting, spreading qualities are very strong in me. It is vata dosha that is my vikriti, that the vata is out of balance and has been for a long time. And at this point, I've also become somewhat kapha imbalanced because due to the lack of sleep over many, many years, the lack of sleep combined with living in the desert, a very, very dusty, dry, windy desert, I've gained weight in part out of a inevitability of the stress of like not exercising and not having the healthiest lifestyle, but also as a means of just buffering myself. So it's a natural tendency. So my work is to garden myself in such a way that I can come back to my essential nature, my true form, in a healthy way. So as we're talking about prakriti and we're talking about what kind of creature am I, the pitta predominant individual will have sharp features, meaning that the head shape itself will have this sort of tapering chin. The eyes will be sharp and penetrating. Just to look at the eyes are like those of a predator. You think about cat, most of the cat family, predatory birds like eagles and hawks. They all have the sharp, penetrating eyes. Am I making sense?
Mhm.
There is very scant or no body hair, and the hair on the head will be very fine. It will have the light quality, meaning that it will be a very fine hair, and a woman may go gray quite early, and on a man will actually get burnt off the head. So balding is a pitta predominant feature. The sharp and penetrating quality shows up with in pitta dosha, not only in the sharpness of the features, but also in the mind. So there's a high degree of analysis, of tending towards even judgment in the pitta mind. And what else to say? There's generally the hot quality pitta predominant individuals, pitta predominant creatures. There will be this pinkishness that comes, or this ruddiness that comes through, irrespective of the ethnicity of the creature. And it's worth mentioning that pitta dosha also has a delicacy to it, because fire and water are these sort of natural opposing forces. There's a delicacy, or it is not buffered like Kappadosha. There's a delicacy to it. In the physical form of the pitta predominant creature, there will be the very ease of becoming overheated, especially during the hot summer sun during the midday. Kappa insulated creatures can actually withstand or be more buffered from it. They may not like and they may feel hot, but they actually can work through the heat of the day if they need to. Pitta creatures will be much more likely to be night owls, which is actually a good reference. attraction to the cool quality of the moon. It's a predominant creatures. Learn a lot from my daughter who watches PBS Kids show called Wildcrats, which are these two biologists who for the last, I think, 25 years have just really had a wonderful life traveling the world and documenting the amazing features of different creatures. They do a cartoon for about 15 minutes where they have to take on the attributes of that creature in order to fend off the villains who are like Zach, the techno inventor who just wants to accumulate as much power and control and wealth as possible. Uses robots to destroy the natural environment, cheats and lies. There's Gourmand, the cook chef who goes and hunts endangered animals and to present them for more expensive menu items. There's a fashion designer who tries to collect animals in order to selfishly create different kinds of things for us to wear. And then there's Paisley the paver who just wants to pave the entire world. So anyway, I'm mentioning this PBS Kids show because it's wonderful to watch the different attributes or different five elements, the gunas, as they come into different creatures all over the world, all over the earth. And also I learned things like there are actually more nocturnal animals than there are daytime animals. I had no idea. So, lots of animals are actually awake at night. And it is the tendency of predatory pitta predominant creatures to oftentimes be attracted to night and the night life. We celebrate Pitta dosha in America. It's the most celebrated elements are fire and water. We come from a stock of fiercely independent people who left some other country somewhere to come here, other than the indigenous people, who mostly have been killed off. Independent nature of those that came to this country, it still runs through our founding and through a lot of what makes America America. That is to be differentiated from those who have more African ancestry, the black people that were able to survive those horrendous boats and then survive the hundreds of years of slavery tend to have more Kappadosha because they are the ones that were able to actually survive. It took that strength of physical form and the resiliency to be able to make it. And then the large population of those that we would call Latino or Mexican are actually largely still the indigenous people in this area, so they come with very many different mixed attributes. I'm overgeneralizing, but just talking about some basic qualities among different racial groups and reminding you that actually every individual is different and all of the attributes and all of the prakriti forms are possible. However, the history does matter in regions. In India, for many, many, many centuries, there's been arranged marriage. So there are a lot more variety of prakriti or forms because frequently people of different body size and body constitutions were matched. Because the most important thing by far in Indian arranged marriage is will the minds match up? The minds matching up is not necessarily just about the five elements, but also according to the unique attributes of the nakshatra, which is the birth star, which also are colored by the five elements, but there are very many attributes that are more refined amongst the different nakshatra. So the minds are matched in traditional arranged marriages because it's the minds that need to hang out with each other over the decades, right? we contrast that with America, where so frequently there is a matching similar body forms. So the kapha form, the earth and water, will show up as a broad skull meaning wide. And even it can be narrower at the top and broader at the bottom. So really well-developed jaw. There are large eyes, and frequently the color blue in Caucasian, whereas the color green is almost always a sign of a pitta predominant. Dark black or dark brown being vata colored eyes. This is more relevant to Caucasian ethnicity, but it's useful. The hair of kapha predominant creatures will be very thick, strong hair, even naturally oily hair, not very fine, thin hair, pitta, or coarse, curly, kinky hair like vata dosha. The shoulders will be broad. There will be body hair, might even be a lot of body hair. The skin will be thick, like they're wearing a wetsuit. The breasts will be large and naturally developed on a woman. And the chest will be broad on a man. Hips and genitalia will be larger. Muscle mass will be naturally larger. They don't necessarily always come in large height. There will be a natural stockiness or strength to the legs and to the limbs. It's very easy for them to make muscle. It's also very easy for them to make adipose tissue, the fat tissue. The lips will be full. The nose will be broad with large openings. There is a natural sense of comfort, stability, and ease to be around a predominant person. They themselves are less bothered generally by the external environment because their own internal environment is substantial enough. And though we talked about, how important it is to have friends and in an institution to have people of different prakritis, like it's so useful to have an insightful and highly analytical, bright mind like a pitta predominant person. It can be exhausting to be around someone who can give feedback endlessly about how we can improve. It can be exhausting. My daughter's woken up, so I need to say hi to her. Hi, sweetheart. You can come over here. I mentioned this, the stability and generosity, seeming willingness to be around all others that Kappadosha provides in the Prakriti. The challenge, though, is that they are also stubborn. So once slighted or once wronged, it can be very difficult for them to forgive. Once you're on the no list, it can be very difficult to get off that. Whereas Vata is very changeable. Pitta, though fiercely opinionated, if things are done, there is this certainly willingness to understand that people care. So we're at a place now where it's good to look at different forms and for you to ask me questions, and for us to talk a little bit about how this manifests across the ages, because it's difficult to look at babies sometimes and to see, hey, you know, what kind of creature is this, especially if the parents have different attributes, have different constitutions. It's also important to remember that the blood pulse is a really essential determining factor. You can practice that now if you reach from underneath. So you hold the hard part of your forearm, and your fingertips come to the thumb side of the soft part. You're coming very close to the wrist crease for the radial artery. You don't use your finger pad, you need to use the fingertips. Even listening to a blood pulse is much easier for a pitta predominant person because we have the sharp and penetrating quality. So it's natural for doctors to be pitta predominant. Sharp and penetrating quality. Whereas Vata would tend to detect too much information, too much change, and have a sort of lack of confidence that what they're detecting is what we're looking for. A Kapha person not having the sensitivity or not having the precision to even find the pulse, all of those things matter. So we're wrapping around. You're right next to the radius. The radius is this long bone that moves, or radiates, or rotates from the elbow to the wrist. And the radial artery is a tube, a garden hose. So the first thing we do is we press all the way down with like a C-clamp. You clamp all the way down on the hose, and then you go side to side, both medial and distal, or medial and lateral. So toward the midline and away from the midline. So you're trying to find where is that garden hose, and you're raking across it. Now a Vata tube, space air tube, will be thin and hard to detect. A Pitta tube will be medium in size, and a Kapha tube will be thick and bigger. The Vata tube might slip away from you or be hard to find because it's thin and it moves, like there's a mobile quality. The Pitta tube will be easy to find because there'll be a direct jumping, boom, 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 sharp quality in the pulse. And the Kapha pulse will swoosh, swoosh. It's gutty, it's movement. How does it go? What kind of creature does it walk like? So the Vata pulse might be like a snake. The Pitta pulse might be like a frog, jumps at you. And the Kapha pulse might be like a swan, kind of swooshes or swims. And the deep pulse is what we're listening for. So that's why we close the tube all the way down and then just barely come up. That is the old story of that riverbed. In addition, we have these three positions, 1, 2, and 3. The most distal position, closest to your hand, representing the Vata predominance, the middle position representing Pitta, and the more proximal, closer to the torso, meaning the Kapha. This also corresponds to the upper, middle, and lower organs. So space and air are more up here, fire and water are in the middle, and water and earth are down below. The deep pulses represent heart and lungs as you're in the more Vata position. They represent liver, gallbladder, small intestine when you're in the middle. And they represent things like the bladder, the kidneys, the large intestine. So bladder, the kidneys, as you're in the lower position. So the solid organs of the body represent the deep pulse and the prakriti, and the surface organs, the surface pulse represents the tubes, the things that the organs where things move through us. Making sense to you all? So the
Mhm.
surface pulse is the vikriti, or how is the weather on the river today. Surface pulse will be different often than the deep pulse. So the deep pulse is important for determining what kind of creature am I. That gives us a sense of more than just pulse rate and more than blood pressure. It gives a sense of what kind of creature am I. In addition, in the pulse reading that the lineage that I come from, all of the three fingers will have a vata spike at the more distal, a pitta spike right in the middle, and a kapha spike that is more proximal. The vata spike will be little squiggly. The pitta spike will feel like boom, boom. And the pitta or the kapha spike, earth water, will be kind of dull and more blunt or swooshy. So it's possible to listen with the different aspects of the three fingers and to listen for those. Do I find that kind of spike? At how many positions will I find it? How many fingers? 1, 2, or 3? So frequently in my lineage, we will call someone like me Vata 1, Pitta 3, Kapha 2, meaning that Pitta is predominant, Kapha is secondary, and Vata is the least in my constitution. However, if I come up to the surface, I will feel Vata much higher, 2 or 3, Pitta fairly balanced, and Kapha a little bit high. So that would mean that my gardening work is to keep in mind that I am a Pitta predominant individual. I will tend to scrape at myself too much. I will tend to have that too focused of approach to how I go about my gardening. But I do need to work on bringing Vata dosha into balance, and to some extent bringing Kapha dosha into balance. I'm working with someone who is a Vata predominant person who's trying to bring balance. I need to remember that their key focus will need to be regular routine, because they are so creative and so easy to get off of routine. I need to remember that a Vata predominant creature will always need to be looking at how to get enough. They tend to be too light. Whether they need to be, whatever they're working on, they will generally need to make sure that they're getting enough food and getting enough rest. And if I'm working with a kapha predominant creature, no matter what their vikriti is, I need to keep in mind that it is very, very easy for them to become too stagnant, to settle. They generally need some sort of team of people that will help motivate them to keep going. So I hope that this has been a good introduction for you. Keep in mind that there's not, hey, what dosha am I? That's anyone that's saying that is that reflects a real ignorance of Ayurveda. We might say, you know, which dosha is highest in my prakriti? You might say that. Or you might say, which dosha is most out of balance in my vikriti? But we don't say, what dosha am I? And in many people, there isn't really a clear sense of one dosha being the strongest, although it is fairly common that people are usually a little bit higher in one grouping of the elements: space, air, fire, water, earth. And it is also true that there's there are, to some extent, especially regions where there have been the people have stayed there for the hundreds or thousands of years. Like my wife, her name is an address. If she did a DNA test, it's a dot in Southeastern Asia or Southeastern India. And her people have very unique Vata traits that are almost like lemurs. They have very, very, very long limbs and very short torsos. So they're unique because there's been so much of that kind of breeding amongst people for thousands of years. Contrast that with Samoans or many Pacific Islanders, where the Kappadosha principle is so strong that they are these very large stock of people. So there are generalities that can be made. Now, your question. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, I remember this wasn't the one I remembered, but last week you spoke on the age groups, like when we're born, we tend to be, the only one I remember is Vata is like as we age, older age is, we experience more Vata qualities.
That's right.
What are the first two? Could you remind me?
Yeah, so it's important to remember that we come into the world a unique combination of the five elements. In the whole history of creation, there has never been another you. And at the same time, everything is always affecting and acting upon our very temporary construct of the five elements. This life form is a very precious flower that we have bloomed, right? And all of things are working on this. Birth trauma, pre and postnatal birth trauma is a huge affect in the modern era. Though we have sanitized and to some extent perhaps increased the likelihood that babies will survive and that mother will survive, we have done a lot of trauma along the way and forgotten a lot of the support that traditional cultures had around us. To some extent, we've all suffered incredible birth trauma that represents the ignorance of moving away from the gardening styles of generational wisdom where women were way more involved in the birth process. It is incredibly inconvenient in the modern era, childbirth. You never know when that baby's going to come. So scheduled C-sections have become so common because they're so much more convenient. And yet when that happens, the microbiome of the newborn is not that of the mother and how well did the mother take care of herself, nor the wise women who knew all of the right circumstances and places and what kind of herbal ingredients and foods to have to support that kind of creature that was about to be born based on the mother and father, and even what environments to give birth, whether it needed to be inside or outside, under a tree, by a river, any of that stuff where the microbiome might be supportive to that kind of creature. Instead, the microbiome that that C-section baby gets is that of the hospital, because that's all of the cutting the mother's abdomen open. And what are they exposed to? Not the vaginal canal of the woman. They're exposed to the air of the hospital. This is just an example, let alone all of the care and time that are needed for the mother and then the infant, all of the decades where formula has been used rather than encouraging women to learn how to breastfeed. It's painful for women to learn to breastfeed, especially Vata or Pitta predominant women. It's incredibly painful. There are a lot of why do we do this? Because this is the things that are going to create happiness and stability and strong organism in the future that are gardening habits that need to happen right at the beginning of life. But in terms of Laura's specific question, everything is always acting on our unique five element creation, but one of them is time itself. At the beginning, all of us are coming from our seed form and we sprout. And all of the first developmental years are about structure. We are finding our structure. So it is the Kapha era. We are also dealing with environmental acclimation. So we take on all of the microbiome of all of the other ecosystem creatures around us. So cold, cough, and congestion and all of these mucus-related disorders are very common in children. Regardless of their particular five element makeup, there will be more juiciness and more Kapha-like quality to the childhood era. The middle age is a Pitta predominant era. It's largely around the mind. What kind of creature am I? How do I fit in? What's my belief structure? Am I going to have kids or not have kids? What's my spirituality? What's my politics? What am I going to do about the old people? All of these are Pitta, largely Pitta era, and the sort of finding balance between effort and relaxation, finding balance between being independent and actually just joining in. All of these things are part of the Pitta era. And the old age is and Vata era. The body is drying up. Now, Vata predominant creatures are the most delicate and the most sensitive. Their sexual attributes, period of sexual activity will be the shortest. It might come later than other preteens or teens, and it might fade away more quickly, 40s or before. A Pitta person, the attributes of recreation or the sex will come strong and perhaps early and last a medium amount of time. For a woman, the menopausal years can be colored with intensity, depending on how well she took care of her flowering during the decades that she had it. A kapha predominant creature, for a woman, the sex attributes might develop a little bit later, but they can last much, much longer if she takes good care of herself. So these are amongst men, the kapha male form, they can tend towards, in terms of the ability to procreate or recreate the male form, the kapha creature for a male easily tends towards the stagnation, so erectile dysfunction, inability, the slow and stagnant principle can set in. So it's really important. Fibrocystic changes to the glands, both in men and women, are more common in kapha individuals. So overgrowth, stagnation are much more important to watch, especially in wealthy countries with access to too much. I talked for a while, but please ask me some more questions. It's important to recognize what happens when the elements, come together in sort of a balanced way. So someone who might be dual dosha, meaning Vata and Pitta, are both really strong. That person, Vata and Pitta, both being really strong, that person will have a lot of the light quality. They'll be very, very sensitive, but there will not be endurance. There will be very little endurance, almost no endurance or resiliency. Whereas if Pitta and Kapha are dual doshic, that person is going to have incredible passion and drive, and they will have incredible endurance. Am I making sense?
Yes.
But there might be a sort of lack of sensitivity or lack of adaptability in that individual.
Here, I do have a question.
Yes.
So in regards to, kind of establishing like your birth dosha or where you were at birth, is one of the intents to try to keep that stable through your life?
Yes, it's important to recognize what is my prakriti. And we want each person to, each individual, each creature to be mindful that that is the most natural way that organism will flourish and flower.
Mm-hmm.
The raccoon doesn't try to be a hummingbird. The raccoon just goes about being the best raccoon it can be. It doesn't think about it. The challenge that humans have is that we have this capacity for self-reflection, and that's both a benefit and a challenge. It's the capacity to self-reflect that allows a human being to strive for godliness. All spiritual traditions talk about this in a different way. And it's dangerous to talk about some sort of hierarchy of creation, but it is the uniqueness of the human form that we have the capacity to choose. And that is both a gift and a burden. So the form, the physical form that we're born into has a uniqueness that and I'm trying to address this, John, in a way that is sensitive, but there's a strength and a power there that we can embrace no matter what the changeability of the mind has. So there is certainly room for the uniqueness of every mind. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is very helpful. And when I did my consultation with you a few weeks back, we talked about kind of my baseline dosha, and you mentioned, I can't remember the term, and that's what I was trying to think of. Like my vata was, what was the term you used? Like higher than it should be, I think was like the intent behind it.
So there's baseline constitution, and then there's current condition.
Right.
Baseline constitution is, am I a willow tree? Am I a cactus? These are very different trees.
Yeah,
And
I was.
my current condition is, am I too dry? Am I too, a willow tree can be too wet, even though it's unlikely because they're able to store so much water. But it's much more dangerous for a succulent or for a cactus, right? They can easily get, you plant them in too much water and that thing's gonna just die.
Yeah. What was the term you used though? It was like vitiation or something along those
Yeah,
lines?
vitiated is the term we
Vitiated.
use.
Okay.
Vitiated means that it is out of balance or aggravated.
Okay.
And when the elements become aggravated, they do different things.
Mm-hmm.
So space and air being aggravated will tend to move stuff. Pitta being aggravated will tend to inflame things or transform things too much, right? So that's where we see this overly transformative process in all autoimmune dysfunction. And when water and earth are out of the balance, they will tend to block things. So they will block movement, for example, or they will block the transformative processes.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. Thank you for
So when
clarifying that for me.
Yeah, so when space and air are out of balance, when space and air are out of balance and they've chronically been out of balance, then there is ways in which the movements of things in the body and in the mind have been affected. In your case, as an example, John, we don't talk about sort of private health concerns, especially on recordings. But the important factor for you is to recognize that your birth constitution, that which you were given, had a possibility of there being a strength of the kappadosha, of the earth and water principle in you. However, choices that you've made along the way have led to the space and air principle rising. And so that's what I mean by vata vitiation, especially as it relates to your respiratory tract.
Okay.
Without
Yeah.
going
Thank you
into
for
more personal matters.
That's fine. No, that was really helpful. I remember the discussion. I just want to make sure I was really clear on the terminology and the intent behind it. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think it's important, John. It's really important to celebrate the strength that the earth and water principle gave you um, as you've navigated the mental aspects of this incarnation for you.
Hmm.
Because you, um, of, in so many ways, have been able to manifest a really beautiful life, though you have overcome incredible challenges,
Mhm.
including like internal mental challenges around how to embrace who you are. That's stability is rare and would have been much harder if you didn't have enough of earth and water in your constitution. If fire was much harder in your constitution, the tendency towards suicide would have been much more likely. If
Mhm.
vata would have been much space and air much higher, then the likelihood that you would have just succumbed to some sort of addiction or even just, not had the physical wherewithal to survive.
Mhm.
So you've done a great, wonderful thing. And as each of us laments some of the elemental constructs we have at times, it's always important to just really love and embrace the five elements in their true form, which is why I really, really try to remember every Ayurveda class to remind each of you to have ritual in your life where you claim space by putting a line of sand somewhere or an actual room in your house or
Mhm.
something. And then you celebrate the air quality. You celebrate that air is love dub, that which beats my heart. Air is moving in and out of me. It's giving me creativity and inspiration. I feel the Holy Spirit. That you celebrate fire, that capacity for luminosity, for to be that things can indeed change. Fire is that things can change. A new day has come. You know, the sun is there,
Mhm.
warmth is there. That you celebrate water. Ah, actually, my juice is in me. I've been born.
Mhm.
Water is peace. Water is being clean. And that you celebrate earth. I am stable. I can endure. I will endure. That relationship to the five elements then also translates into our food choices. When we take in plant matter, especially leaves and flowers, we're celebrating the space and air principle.
Mhm.
When we take in, that which helps us to digest, we're celebrating the fire principle. Whether it's we take the time to properly prepare, beans, or if you eat meat by actually, popping some seeds and some onions or ginger or things that have like that capacity to bring the sharp quality, even things like cardamom.
Mhm.
Celebrate that fire is there. And we celebrate water and earth in so many ways with food, because so much of the food is water and earth by nature. All of the fruits and carbohydrates, breads and starchy vegetables, and certainly animal protein. So
Mhm.
we celebrate the elements in that way. What other questions do you all have? I didn't mention Vata and Kapha coming together in a constitution in a form, but we see animals like, the heron, big bird. Both Vata and Kapha are there. You know, we see um, creatures that don't have what we would distinguish like a giraffe, right? these creatures that where Vata and Kapha come together and are dual doshic. You have amongst you Teresa, who has Vata and Kapha strong together in her constitution. So there are these seemingly opposites, space, air, and water, earth, and yet they can come together in quite amazing ways in creatures. And it's much more common in places like India where there were more arranged marriages. Typically, looking at your ancestry, it is useful for helping to discern how do the 5 elements run through my family lineage. When Pitta is strong throughout the family lineage, there will certainly be a history of hyperreactivity or autoimmune dysfunction in the family lineage. For example, in my own family where Pitta runs very strong on my mom's side, I have cousins who have very, very sensitive skin, who can very easily burn, who have severe anaphylactic shock reactions to peanuts and other food groups. There are also this incredible like ruddiness to the skin, delicacy to the creatures, and also a lot of engineers, doctors, physicists, whatnot on my mom's side. My dad's side comes from a much more earth predominant body stock. My dad's family, the Cajun people, the Cajun French people in general, have survived the many hundreds of years of fleeing some form of persecution themselves, made their home down in that sticky, cloudy, swampy area of Louisiana, which then also colored their constitution over the centuries. So, you know, the ability to endure and the ability to be insulated, it's incredibly strong in my dad's family. My grandfather, for example, worked for 50 years in the oil and gas disgusting refineries, turning a pipe exposed to God only knows how many chemicals and whatever kind of things. But because of his constitution, he was actually able to make it for 50 years, which is kind of a miracle. We look and see these body types as the ones that are out there doing these jobs that, like this world or not, we are reliant on these energy sources. Do any of you have any questions about your own constitution?
I do, but I'm going to initiate doing a private with you about it because I think mine has some confusing elements.
Yeah, well, you certainly look like a Pitta predominant woman where Kapha is very close to being the same. But we see that in Laura's hair, the oiliness of her skin, even at the age. How old are you now, Laura?
48.
Yeah, so she's in her late 40s. So there's both Pitta and Kapha are strong, but as we look at the form, it's somewhat difficult to discern which is the more dominant, the fire-water principle or the water-earth principle. But both are strong. The sharp feature and the sharp feature and the light or sparkly quality come through in your form enough that and certainly the ruddiness, sort of that tendency towards the inflammatory processes that would bring color to the skin, but also internally seem to be strong. I think it's more likely that your Pitta predominant, but your Kapha is actually a little too high, meaning that whether it's postpartum or whatever it was, that you didn't have the capacity to get back to your more Pitta form is more likely. And that's common for women postpartum in this country. it's less likely that you're kapha predominant and are going through some sort of pitta aggravated, isolated incident. Am I making sense?
Totally.
Well, I hope those of you that have attended today have enjoyed the today discourse, and that those of you that listen to this recording or feel informed. I think it's one of the things I feel really content about is reminding each of you that the form that you inhabited is a unique and beautiful form. And your form is your temple. And learning about its attributes and finding a sense of what its healthy baseline is not about being stereotyped or stuck. It's merely about being with what is. And being with what is what is spiritual. Can you be with what is? There's a tremendous amount of peace in that. We all have memories of other incarnations. We all have memories of other incidents. We all have things that happen in this lifetime that make us wish we could change what we are. But finding peace with what is, and then growing from where I'm at into a more clearer reflection of divinity. That is the job of the human, is to more clearly reflect the light of God. So enjoy your own daily check-in with your form, both physical and psychological, and keep up the great work gardening yourself, knowing that the qualities of your current state are the ones to address, while keeping in mind that what kind of constitution you have. We'll end with a closing chant. Chidanandarupa Shivoham Shivoham Chidanandarupa Shivoham Shivoham Chit Ananda Rupa Shiva Aham Shiva Aham. This great epic poem says that my true rupa, my form, is the bliss of awareness itself. I am the Holy Spirit. I am Shiva. Have a great weekend. I'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, Pierre.